Hello all, I've just finished a rebuild of my routing machine. I don't have a proper name for it or know what to call it, but it's a kind of manual CNC, a router sled and copy router, and a very versatile machine at that. Some of you may have followed the progression of this machine from when it started out as a simple baby router sled using alley profile, to what it is now, a 4-axis machine resembling a CNC, just without the stepper motors and computer control. I still get questions about it though, so with this rebuild being as far as I'm going to take this machine, thought I'd do a walkthrough of the machine and its accessories, covering the whys and wherefores as I go, and attempting to cost it at the end. This is how the machine was before the latest rebuild then. You can see the 2060 profile rails of the X-axis sit atop the light subframe made of 2040 profile. Triangular 4mm alley plates tying it together in each corner. This kept things nice and light and gave good clearance. It was also surprisingly stiff, but I was getting the odd strange result when machining mortise and tenon joints sometimes, so in this rebuild I've taken a number of steps to stiffen it up without going too mad and adding too much weight. It does, after all, hang on the wall when not in use. And this is how it appears now. Same, but different in a few crucial ways. Firstly, the X-axis rails are now flat to the base frame. This has allowed me to add some 2060 cross members. Plus, the plates in each corner are now in 8mm aluminium with more fixings to secure everything. Altogether, a much stiffer platform from which to set everything else. Dropping the X-axis rails like that has lost me some machining height, but depending on bit length and attachment, I've still got between 60 and 100mm, so still plenty for what it's used for. There's also been some changes to the Y and Z axis, or left to right and up and down. The big C-beam profile is more central on its plates either side, and the gantry plates are larger to allow for more bearings. These have cut down my working area a little, giving me a machining width of 500mm comfortably by 850. This is on a machine 1 metre long by 640mm wide. I use these 12mm linear rails on every axis. As you can see, they have many holes for many screws. Originally, I put a screw in every third hole. I don't think that ever caused an issue, but in the rebuild I decided to stump up and make sure there's a screw in every hole in every rail. Some 200 altogether I think. At each end of the rail, on the X and Y axes, I have these little thumb screws. These not only stop the bearings rolling right off the frame, but as they can move, they allow me to set them anywhere along the rail length as limit stops. Great for machining housings and such, or to protect attachments from the router cutter. A lesson I've learned as this machine has progressed is add sliding T-nuts everywhere as I'm building the machine. Mainly, as you can see here, to the base frame. These allow me to quickly add on the attachments and accessories. On to the business end then. Same as it was before, just more. And I've definitely noticed an increased stiffness and stability here as a result. Still using the standard OpenBuilds router mount, screwed to the alley plate from the back and using 4 corner brackets above and below. Nice and solid. It could mount straight to the profile, but I have a set of screws in the alley plate that allow me easy, or easier anyway, adjustment for camber. These bigger alley plates have also allowed me to double up the bearings, 4 each now on the X and Y axis. Finally added a proper depth stop, similar to that on a plunge router. I was using some old flip stops from a bench dog's fence, the original plastic body ones. Thing is, the ball screw that controls the up and down movement can apply a surprising amount of leverage. It was all too easy to slightly overcook it and flex the flip stop. This straight up and down rod is much more solid and stops with a satisfying clunk. Round the back then, as mentioned before, I moved the C-beam forward, more central to its mounting plates each side. This meant I could add more profile behind it to help reduce torsion, keeping both sides moving exactly together. I may get another 2060 profile to stick here, but this single 2020 is doing the job just fine it seems. Mounted to the gantry plate on the other side of the C-beam then, is one of this machine's most important features for me, the copy pin. This is 6mm steel and, keeping the protrusion 30mm or less, is solid. I use it with 6mm cutters, keeping the ratio 1:1 and nice and simple. With the extra room on this alley plate, I may add other pin sizes for larger cutters, giving me more flexibility, but keeping the pin-cutter ratio 1:1. That's the basic machine covered then, a fancy router or flattening sled. But it really comes into its own with these accessories. Angle jigs, fences, mounts, and a mini lathe type attachment, or 4th axis. My most basic attachment is a single piece of 2020 profile with a couple of brackets for mounting and a thumb screw stop, a simple fence. It can be mounted along or across the base and is set using the mandrel in the router. When setting, I use the thumb screw stops I showed you earlier to keep the router head in place along whichever axis needs to be set. In the same vein is this jig, except it's a vertical rather than a horizontal fence. It too has a stop, a nice broad face on the 80mm C-beam to clamp to, and an additional plate for a little extra back support for the workpiece if needed. Its job is just to give me 90 degrees, and allow for a workpiece to be clamped like so. Depending on the cutter clearance needed, it can be mounted above or below the base thanks to all the sliding T-nuts hidden in profile. This next accessory is something I've recently made for it, but the most important for the mitered mortise and tenon joints on my chair frames. It's an angle jig, and for the pivot, the red bits, I've repurposed an angle drilling guide from Banggood that I reviewed not long ago. In the review, I slated the drilling guide as not fit for purpose. For this purpose though, along with the attached profile pieces, it's perfect. There's two bits of 2060 profile at 90 degrees to each other for work holding, and as you'd imagine, the position or angle of these can be adjusted via the pivot. From the work holding profile pieces, there's an extra limb that can be attached to the main frame for support. This too is fully adjustable via thumb screws. There's a clamping lever with a sliding T-nut permanently attached to the frame to receive this. 4 L brackets clamp it to the frame. Should have shown this when it was above the table, but the bottom of the support arm is also adjustable. So when I've set the work holding angle, the support arm can be set in the most appropriate position. I don't use the scale on the red pivot parts to set anything but rough position. I set the thumb screws lightly friction tight, then use the little digital angle box to set the final angle before cinching everything tight. Much like setting the angle bed in relation to the router, the mount is set and positioned in relation to the Y-axis C-beam using a large square. Might sound like a pain putting this on and setting the angle, but it only takes 2 to 3 minutes max. Then, everything tightened down, it creates a nice solid platform to work off, ready for work to be clamped on and machined. Well, if I just wanted to machine clean mitered faces anyway. To machine the mitered mortise and tenon for my chairs, setup continues round the back. This is where I set up the mount for my copy plates, again mounted by 4 L brackets to the frame in each corner. Here are my mortise and tenon templates. They reverse mirror each other, save for a slight pitch I've put on the mortise one to help me with best fit. They give me 3 size options, 6x12mm, 8x24mm and 12x36mm. Copy pin drops in to meet them, and by marking the first piece to be machined, I move the router cutter to the edges of my marks, letting the pin drag the copy plate into position. This can take a few minutes to set just so. Once set though, on pieces of the same dimension anyway, it'll machine away all day long. And having marked the first plate position with the little stops I have for it, it can be swapped out quickly for its opposite number. One other partner I have for the angle jig is just another piece of 2060 profile. Nothing to do with angles, it just gives me 2 pieces to create a flat work support over the centre of the base of the machine. Or indeed a slightly raised bed if that's what's needed. Not a lot to it, but increases the working and clamping options. Last attachment then is this, the mini lathe or 4th axis. Headstock end, a 30-some-year-old Black & Decker drill, is fixed in position, with the tailstock end movable on its subframe. It rolls along on 4 little V-wheels for this type of profile mounted underneath. I can lock it down to both its own subframe and the main frame for extra support once set. For such a janky looking thing, it works really well. Alignment stays pretty good, but I do have to square the rolling tailstock part to the mainframe before tightening down. Turning, depending on cutter length again, is sensibly a maximum of 80mm diameter, length up to 600mm. More than enough for the small spindles and dowels I made it for. That said, I did recently have to get a bit creative to turn the pieces for this creation. Besides the oak legs and the blackwood dowel pegs, this machine also turned the 180mm diameter centrepiece, 3 of them as it happens in one solid block. That was fun, but it worked. Definitely at the limit there, mind. It's much more at home turning these little blackwood dowels, which is the main purpose of it. That about covers it, I think. I've got some plans to salvage a guide plate from an old dovetail jig for another accessory for this machine, but really, it's time to leave this iteration where it is and get it to work. You'll see it working in upcoming vids, no question. And if you can't wait, you can see it used in my recent chair, lamp and speaker stand build videos. And more besides if you go back through. It's already proved my most versatile woodworking machine and bailed me out of tight spots, both in the workshop and for work on the job site. I'm glad to finally have a video I can point people curious about the machine to. Worth repeating here too that this machine was designed to be slung out of the way on the wall when I'm done. It's down to space issues. I say this just in case someone mentions, why don't you go full CNC, or shouldn't it be mounted to a purpose-built bench for stability and whatnot. If I had the room for a dedicated bench for it, that's the route I would go, but I don't, so I haven't. So what did it cost then? Well, this has been a progression, so I don't have all the invoices, but going on current prices, for the basic machine minus the attachments, Mafell milling motor and accessories, it would be about £500. What really adds to the cost of it is using these type of linear rails and bearings and all that aluminium plate. I drilled and cut all the aluminium plate myself, which saves me some over getting it CNC'd. The cool thing with this profile stuff though, is it's like a heavy duty Meccano set. Eventually you build up enough kit that if one creation doesn't suit your needs, or you've grown out of it in some way, you can dismantle it and make something else. The router mount is an OpenBuilds one from Ooznest, where I get my profile and fixings from incidentally. They 3D print a bunch of inserts for it, for different palm routers like the DeWalt's, Makitas, Bosch, etc. And of course a 43mm one to mount the Mafell. Lots of options out there. So yeah, it didn't cost the earth considering it's such a versatile machine, but hardly a budget one either. But then, I never meant for it to be, just wanted it to be good, which it is. As ever then, I hope this has piqued your interest or satisfied your curiosity. Thoughts, questions and discussion on the machine are more than welcome below. Consider subbing if you haven't already, give the vid a like if you did, help support the channel by clicking the thanks button below. And, as always, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.